Part 5. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 41. Faced with this extremely vicious punch, if it weren't for Yang Zixuan's agility, he would have been beaten to the point of being thrown around in a panic. He did a backflip and fell to his knees, feeling that his whole arm all numb. But the worst thing is not this, but the poison that keeps eating away at him. Negative warnings kept coming one after another. Yang Zixuan hurriedly took out a bottle of potion and drank it, but the effect was minimal. The negative effects on him were increasing, like a snowball, reaching the point where they could no longer be eliminated. After just a few breaths, Yang Zixuan couldn't hold on anymore. He looked sideways at Su Tong and found that Su Tong was losing ground under the suppression of Sanggu. As for Xiong Tao, after this guy was hit by an arrow, his condition was worse than his own, and his entire face turned dark green. Humph. Just when he was debating whether to activate the escape prop he bought at a high price, he suddenly found that the man had walked up to him. Big black hands grabbed his shoulders, lifted him up from the ground, opened his mouth to reveal a huge mouthful of stench, and said in blunt Chinese, "Take out the golden dagger." But as soon as he finished speaking, Yang Zixuan was immediately fainted by the sudden stench. Seeing this, the man was stunned for a moment, and he groped around on his body, even taking off his pants, but he couldn't find the golden dagger. The man's face turned a little ugly now. Looking at Su Tong, who was still fighting fiercely with the mourning dog, he strolled forward. He was almost 2 meters tall. He seemed to be walking slowly and steadily, but he was actually walking very fast. Amazing. He pushed the mourning dog away and punched Su Tong. The terrifying force bursting out from the fist instantly made people feel what it was like a landslide and the earth was shattering. Su Tong's mind tightened and he did not dare to take a hard hit, so he hurriedly hid behind him. But the wind that followed the fist hit him and he still lost the ability to resist in an instant. His body turned back and fell heavily to the ground. He rolled his eyes and fainted. "Catch them and take them all away," the man shouted in Miao language, asking the Miao people in the bush to come out, and tied them all up with 5 flowered ropes. Then a wooden stick was strung from the end of the rope, and the 3 of them were lifted up like prey. As for Yang Guanjin and Old Bart, there was no room for resistance. The voodoo skills that Yang Guanjin relied on for a living were simply vulnerable to this man. After struggling for a few times, Old Bart was stabbed unconscious by a Hmong man with a poisonous stinger. These Miao people are not tall, but they are more agile than ordinary people when walking in the mountains and forests. Their bare feet are almost as if they are walking on flat ground on the uneven and gravelly mountain roads. Silently and very fast. I don't know how long it took for Yang Zixuan to open his eyelids. But as soon as he opened his eyes, he was stunned for a moment, because Su Tong beside him actually opened his eyes for some time and looked at him with a wink. "You." Yang Zixuan frowned and was about to speak when he saw Su Tong scanning his body with squinted eyes. The strange look in his eyes made him very uncomfortable. Following his gaze, Yang Zixuan realized that he had been stripped naked, leaving only a pair of underwear with a baby elephant printed on it. Yang Zixuan suddenly felt bad, but after struggling for a few times, he was kicked hard by the Miao people on the side. He mumbled a lot of words in Miao dialect that none of them could understand. "Stop struggling, it's quite cool. Besides, it's much more comfortable if someone carries us up the mountain than walking by ourselves," Su Tong said to him with a smile. You can still laugh at this time. Yang Zixuan still looked nonchalant when he saw that this guy was actually about to die. He didn't know whether to say he had a good attitude or that he was careless. Of course, he prefers the former. After all, he is the one who made the mistake, so he can't make the mistake a second time. After looking back at Xiong Tao behind him and confirming that Xiong Tao was still alive, Yang Zixuan truly breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, not only was Xiong Tao still alive, but the Miao people also applied ointment on his body, and the Wang team member who fainted was also carefully taken care of. It seemed that they cared about the lives of them. Although I don't know what the reason is, I think it's definitely because of Yang Guanjin. It's a pity that Yang Guanjin and old Bart were driven ahead. They seemed to be talking to the leading man, and they were too far away to listen. Less than. Are you really not considering joining our team? I am sincere and want to join our team. If the situation goes wrong, I can force the entire team to deviate from this script. Yang Zixuan has not given up on recruiting Su Tong to join the team. Anyway, he is idle, so he might as well try again at this time. Is there still such an operation? Su Tong raised his eyebrows slightly, looking excited. Yang Zixuan nodded. I have a special prop, but after using it, the difficulty of our next script world may be greatly increased, and all gains in this script world will be cleared. Yang Zixuan briefly introduced the levels of props. Speaking of which, props in the script space are all kinds of weird and there are big differences between them. Ordinary props and special props. Ordinary props are the prop cards in their hands. They are strong and weak, but they are still within the scope of the rules. Special props may not give you much power, but the key lies in the word special. These props often have magical properties, and even break out of the rules in a sense and subvert your three views. If strictly classified, the various potions they take are actually special props. In addition, there are legendary top-level golden items, but that thing is too far away from them. Even certified players don't dare to expect that kind of thing. It can even be said to be a legend. In a sense, the person who masters the golden item card is a god. But no matter what kind of props they are, they all adhere to the principle of equal exchange. The more powerful the exchange is, the more astonishing the price one pays. Both script points and negative impacts are indispensable. Yang Zixuan paused for a moment when he said this, and looked at Su Tong jokingly. You should actually be considered a rookie now. Even though you took away the prop card of the third child, you are not even 1/5 of the strength of the third child. It's not enough, or else I'll be pressed down and beaten by that guy. Yang Zixuan was referring to Sangu. In his eyes, Sangu's strength was second-rate at best among ordinary players. Su Tong got Zhang Hu's item cards, which were all top quality, but he couldn't defeat the morning dog. The reason for this lies in two words. Yang Zixuan grinned and said, combined. Even if it is a top-quality prop card, the power it can provide is actually limited due to negative effects, so the combination of prop cards is particularly important. When Su Tong heard this, he immediately understood the key to the problem. A reasonable combination is far better than players holding various top-notch prop cards, because as long as the combination is just right, it can not only greatly improve one's ability, but also greatly reduce the burden on one's ability. It is still a cliché. In a word, there is no strongest item, only the strongest combination. Yang Zixuan talked eloquently. Although he was still an ordinary player, the information he learned was the key that many players had to go through several circles to understand. You must make good use of every square in the prop book. These squares will only become more precious at critical moments. He reminded Su Tong again. Except for certified players, ordinary players like them only have 3 pages of props, with a total of only 27 grids. Counting with your fingers, the number of these grids is actually very limited. In addition to prop cards, they will also be occupied by title cards. If you want to add some trivial items here and there, it will be even more limited. The closer you get to the back, the more precious these grids become, so you have to think twice about what to put in each grid. While the two were talking, their eyes suddenly lit up. They had climbed to the top of the mountain. The Miao people temporarily put them on the ground and began to build a bonfire to rest and eat. Drink some water. Sangu walked over from the side, took out the kettle and handed it to Su Tong. Don't blame me, my main mission is different from yours. It's an opposing mission, So don't make excuses. Yang Zixuan sat aside and joked. Snort. Sangu snorted coldly and looked at Su Tong. When did you start doubting me? What if I say that I have always doubted you? Su Tong looked at him with a half smile. You have so many potions on hand, you can prescribe them by yourself, but in order to win over me, you gave me such a precious potion. At first I thought it was because you valued my title of doctor, but then I thought about it and thought it was too much of a coincidence. He was referring to the first mission between the two, when Sangha rushed into the room. He actually didn't hear the sound of fighting at all, and Sangha's injuries looked fatal, but they were not the result of suffocation on the spot. At that time, he was very suspicious of why the opponent would leave the dagger on him if he could crush him. In addition, he had given the potion to himself before, wasn't it just so that he could save him in the shortest possible time? It was as if all this was arranged by Sangha in advance. How could I not doubt him? Ha ha ha, you still think that you have control of the overall situation, but you don't know that you are the one being used. Yang Zixuan sat aside and gave Su Tong a thumbs up. Hi. Su Tong retorted, you guys are tough. The lost dog was caught in the middle, feeling like he was no longer human inside and out, and his heart was indescribably twisted. It felt like his boyfriend and his mistress were exchanging glances in front of his original wife, and occasionally mocking him as the original wife. The furious Sangha finally couldn't bear it and pointed at the man standing on the top of the mountain in front of him. He laughed angrily and said, after all that, you are still prisoners. After all, you are still Brother Huo Ying, tall and hard. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 42. It's right here, it's right here, it's absolutely unmistakable. The dragon hides in the sea of clouds, and the purple energy rushes to the bullfight. It melts 3 inches of ground. In Daozang's game, the game of ascending to immortality, it's absolutely unmistakable. Looking at the mist-shrouded and condensed sea of clouds at the foot of the mountain, Zhou Huazheng held a compass in his hand and compared it carefully. The trend of the mountains and rivers in front of him became more and more obsessed with his eyes, and he couldn't help but walk forward. As a result, as soon as he stepped out with one foot, his foot was suddenly in the air, his body suddenly slipped, and the scene in front of him suddenly started to spin. Ah! Seeing the abyss in front of him, Zhou Huazheng subconsciously covered his hair and screamed. Fortunately, a big hand came out from behind him, grabbed his collar, and pulled him back like a chicken. If you want to die, it's not time yet. Huo Ying patted the shocked Zhou Huazheng, looked at the canyon under the mountain in the distance, and couldn't help but think deeply. Over the years, he had traveled through countless mountains in order to find this place, but he was surprised that the rumored sacred place was hidden in such an inconspicuous ravine. Turning around, he looked at Yang Guanjin and old Bart. Their sparse white hair was fluttering in the wind, and they walked step by step in front of Yang Guanjin. Bah! You will be punished. Yang Guanjin spat coldly and glared at Huo Ying, his big watery eyes almost bleeding. But Huo Ying didn't care. Instead, he looked at Yang Guanjin's cheeks and said seriously, you look like her. Keep it. It's a gift to you. Huo Ying said and actually took off his boots and placed them in front of Yang Guanjin. Looking at this pair of boots sewn from human skin, the leather of the shoes has cracked several pieces and is sewn together with unknown animal skin, but you can vaguely see a hole with an eye on it, as if staring. Same as myself. Yang Guanjin's breathing suddenly became rapid, she held the shoes in her arms tremblingly, and knelt down on the ground with a general cry. The unpressible anger made her want to cry, but she couldn't cry, and she couldn't make a sound even if she wanted to be angry. A heartbreaking low sound came from his mouth. But to Huo Ying, such a voice is undoubtedly the sound of nature. Hey hey hey! He grinned, strolled up to Su Tong and the others, opened his thick palm toward Yang Zixuan, and saw a black insect appear in his hand. Looking at the dark bug, Yang Zixuan's face turned dark and he was about to speak, but Huoying didn't seem to give him a chance at all. He stretched out his hand to hold Yang Zixuan's chin and stuffed the insect into Yang Zixuan's mouth. What is this? Vomit. When the insect entered the mouth, Yang Zixuan's face turned the color of pig liver. He opened his mouth to vomit, but found that he could not vomit out at all. The mourning dog on the side explained to him with a proud face, "This is a voodoo insect. It attacks once every 12 hours. When it attacks, it can make you realize that life is worse than death. Oh, by the way, if you eat this thing, just don't think about spitting it out, even if it comes back, it will still remain in your body." As he spoke, Mango took out a bottle from his pocket and took out a white pill. "This is the antidote. Only this can kill the worms in your stomach." After saying that, he put the pill into his mouth and smashed it. "It's a bit sour, but it tastes pretty good, like eating plum blossoms." In fact, there is no need for Sango to explain, Yang Zixuan has already received a prompt from space. Warn. There is an unknown organism parasitizing the area. The organism cannot be identified and cannot be eliminated. Please eliminate it yourself. Seeing Yang Zixuan's face full of pain and wanting to vomit but unable to do so, Huoying couldn't help but grin and looked at Su Tong again with satisfaction. However, he found that Su Tong's mouth had grown, as if he was waiting for him to feed him. Seeing Huoying's strange eyes, Su Tong couldn't help but curiously asked, "Well, can you sprinkle some cumin on it?" Even a ruthless person like Huoying was stunned by Su Tong. The smile on his face faded, he threw the bug into his mouth, stood up and left. "Humph, you can really pretend. When the time comes, you will know what it means to be awesome." The corner of Sango's mouth twitched, failing to see Su Tong's embarrassed look, he turned around and followed him angrily. After Huoying gave Xiong Tao and Team Wang the bugs to eat, he had them untied. Not only that, he also arranged a nice meal for them, a roasted wild boar. This makes people wonder what Huoying wants to do. During this period, Su Tong saw that after these mountain seedlings applied another layer of ointment on Captain Wang's body, Captain Wang, who was already seriously injured, slowly woke up. And it seemed like nothing was wrong, but after the guy woke up, he obviously became extremely anxious, and his whole face turned red. He didn't stand or sit. He even took off his clothes. After learning about his current situation from old Bart, he rushed to Huoying and roared loudly with an angry expression on his face. The result was of course predictable. Huoying only punched him hard, and the guy fainted on the ground again. The two were not in the same dimension at all. Seeing this, Su Tong couldn't help but curiously approached him and pointed to the green ointment on his hand in front of a Meow Man. At the same time, he took out a candy from his prop book and gave it to him, indicating that he wanted to exchange it. Seeing the candy in Su Tong's hand, the Meow Man became alert. It wasn't until Su Tong made a few gestures to indicate that it was time to eat that the Meow Man showed curiosity and carefully took the candy in his hand. Look carefully. It wasn't until he tried to add a bite that he was surprised to find that this sweet thing was so delicious. So he naturally threw the jar of green ointment in his hand to him. In fact, these Meow people are not bad. They are simple in nature and are not the kind of demons who kill without blinking an eye. However, their leader is. After throwing the ointment into the prop book, Su Tong got the information about the ointment. 100 Chonghuoxia juice. The production method is unknown, and the Meow people are addicted to drugs. How to use: apply to the wound to quickly stop bleeding and gain 200% recovery effect for 30 minutes. Note, it is a 3-part poison. If used too much, symptoms of blood fever will occur. Seeing the effect of the medicine, Su Tong immediately understood why Captain Wang became so anxious. However, this medicine was indeed a good thing. Su Tong wanted to change it a little more, but in the end, no one among the Meow people was willing to trade with him. Because they found that the tongue of the friend who had eaten the candy turned red, thinking that the candy he took out was poisonous. In fact, it was just candy coloring, but no matter how he explained it, these meow people refused to come near him at all. After a meal, everyone began to go down the mountain. Passing through the dense woods, Yang Zixuan, who was walking in front, suddenly stopped and looked at the grass beside him suspiciously. After he gently pushed aside the grass, he saw a mummy kneeling on the spot. The mummy was covered with a cloak and had its hands folded, as if sincerely worshipping forward. After everyone cleared the grass completely and took a look, they discovered that there were actually 6 such mummies here. They all looked the same, kneeling on the ground with their hands clasped in front of them. These people are like Tibetan lamas. Xiong Tao observed it carefully and said strangely, "Why do these lamas want to die here?" After he finished speaking, Zhou Huazhong couldn't wait to step forward and looked around these lamas carefully, his face becoming more and more excited. Yes, it must be true. This is the Immortal Ascension Bureau. These lamas must have found a place to kneel down and worship like this. Then why did they die here? Sangu asked with suspicion on his face. This question left Zhou Huazhong speechless for a moment. In the end, he could only give a very vague answer, maybe they have other ideas. I don't know. However, after looking in the direction where these lamas were kneeling and worshipping, their eyes couldn't help but widen, and they saw a dilapidated stone tower standing in the woods ahead. Yes. Yes. It must be. He danced and pointed in the direction of the stone tower, and said to Huo Ying aside, "That's right, this must be the place we are looking for." Huo Ying nodded with satisfaction and glanced away. He saw the Miao people around him immediately raising their bows and arrows and pointing them at Su Tong and others. "You guys go ahead." Huo Ying waved his hand and pushed Yang Guanjin towards Su Tong and others, while grabbing old Bart's throat with his other hand. "Dad," Yang Guanjin's expression changed and she wanted to turn back, but an arrow landed at her feet first. I saw Huo Ying pointing forward. It turned out that the reason why he did not kill them and treated their injuries was not out of good intentions, but because he wanted them to clear the way for Huo Ying and others. At the same time, Su Tong and others also heard the sound of space prompts in their ears. Main Mission 2, Exploring the Ascension Bureau. Mission Goal, Find the secret of the Shengxian Bureau. Task Tip, what exactly is a ferry? Maybe you will have your own answer here. Hey, everyone, I wish you immediate success. Oh, don't forget the time. You only have about 10 hours. If you don't come back obediently, be careful, the bugs will bite a big hole in your belly. The morning dog waved towards them and reminded them kindly. Let's go. At this point, we have no choice. Yang Zixuan, with a dark face, summoned his flying blade and walked in front to clear the way. Bah, this piece of shit. Xiong Tao cursed and spat out a mouthful of phlegm, but unfortunately Sangu quickly dodged it. Huo Ying and others stood there and waited for a while. Seeing that Su Tong and the others had already walked away, they followed them leisurely. After the group of people left, the empty forest suddenly became quiet again. Crack. Suddenly, a strange noise came from a mummy, and the head of the mummy began to shake unnaturally, as if it had come to life. However, as the shaking sound became louder and louder, I saw a red-headed centipede sticking out of the hollow eyeball of the mummy. The slender tentacles on the top of its head slowly crawled out of the eye socket. It was a complicated day. I wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, I decided not to take advantage of the heat. I can only say that some people will never leave. In our hearts, they will always protect us. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 43. The dilapidated stone walls looked particularly majestic under the sunlight, but there was an indescribable smell in the air. What does this smell like? Xiong Tao lifted his nose and took a deep breath. He felt that the smell was neither smelly nor fragrant, but there was always a heady feeling when smelling it. It smells like corpse oil. Captain Wang, who was following behind, suddenly said, corpse oil is formed when the body is highly decomposed and the fat overflows in the form of oil. It usually appears on corpses that have not had time to be processed in the summer. Corpse oil. Xiong Tao's face darkened and he felt a little disgusted for a moment, but he still asked without giving up, isn't the corpse smelly? How come it smells so good? Captain Wang glanced at him and saw that he was suppressing his disgust. He couldn't help but sneered and talked about a case that year in a leisurely manner. 2 years ago, there was a case involving a J woman. This woman was already in her 40s, but she had a special fragrance that permeated her body. With this fragrance, her business was very good. But after she was caught in a pornographic operation, we found 3 corpses in the refrigerator of her home. The jaws of these corpses were cut off and then burned with candles. The dripping oil was corpse oil. The fragrance on the woman's body is the scent of the perfume she made with these corpse oils. Although the smell is a little different from the one here, I will never make a mistake. It is definitely the smell of corpse oil. Vomit. When he heard this, Xiong Tao couldn't help but think of a bunch of men lying on top of a woman, frantically licking and sniffing the woman covered in corpse oil, and he immediately vomited on the spot. Su Tong and Yang Zixuan were fine. Yang Zixuan even asked thoughtfully, so that woman is still a murderer? Captain Wang nodded. The deceased were all her regular customers, and it was easy to find out their family backgrounds. They were all single men with few people at home, so until the case was solved, no one came to claim the bodies. Su Tong interrupted at this time and asked, a woman kills 3 men just to get the corpse oil on their bodies? If so, killing one is enough. After all, there are many places besides the chin that can be used. Why do she have to kill them continuously? Lose 3 men. Captain Wang was startled when he heard this, and whispered, maybe the corpse oil on the chin is better. Hearing this, Yang Guanjin finally couldn't help but interrupt their interest in continuing to discuss this case. Stop talking, this matter has nothing to do with our current situation. After speaking, she did not forget to remind, 9 times out of 10, the voodoo bugs you eat are heart-piercing voodoo bugs. When the time comes and there is no antidote, the voodoo bugs will start biting along your intestines, and finally get into your heart, killing you. There is a hole in my heart. Damn, I remembered the movie Alien I watched last time. Xiong Tao twitched the corner of his mouth, thinking of the scene of his chest exploding, and his whole body felt bad. Can this thing be removed through surgery? When it came to goo worms, Yang Zixuan finally became serious, but behind the scenes, he was still considering whether to use special props to leave here. Surgery? How precise is that surgery? And the bugs will keep moving. How can you confirm the location of the bugs? Yang Guanjin shook her head. This question was beyond her understanding. Although she knew some medicine, in this terrible era, how could she understand the development of medicine in reality when she had never even been exposed to X-ray machines? Degree. But having said that, even with advanced medicine in reality, it is obviously not easy to accurately find the location of bugs. So we can only find what he is looking for in exchange for our lives. Is this why he doesn't ask for the golden dagger even though he knows it is on you? As Su Tong spoke, he did not forget to glance at Yang Zixuan. Thinking of his cute cartoon underwear, he must be a young man full of childlike innocence. Sensing Su Tong's teasing look, Yang Zixuan twitched the corner of his mouth, coughed twice and said, then what exactly is he looking for? This time Yang Guanjin also looked confused. I don't know. I've only heard of the Shengxian Bureau, but I don't know the details. Su Tong raised his eyebrows and said thoughtfully, it's better to go in and take a look first. Yes, seeing is believing. What Zhou Huazheng said is too hypocritical and illusory. Captain Wang waved his hand and motioned for everyone to continue moving forward. At the same time, he did not forget to ask Yang Zixuan if his gun was in his hand. When Yang Zixuan mentioned this matter, he couldn't help but touch his chin and shook his head, no. Seeing that they refused to admit it, Captain Wang had no choice but to keep his head down and walk in front with Xiong Tao. The group walked through the dilapidated ruins, and in front of them were stone towers and pine forests. This place. Everyone felt something was wrong, but they couldn't tell what was wrong. Wait, look over there. At this time, Yang Zixuan suddenly noticed something and pointed forward. Everyone stepped forward and took a look. It was a stone wall, but there was a set of exquisite reliefs carved on the stone wall. In the mural, there are densely packed monks kneeling on the ground. Right in front of these monks, it is not the Buddha but a demon king with a green face and fangs. What's even weirder is that the devil actually lost his arms, his blood spilled on the ground, and lotus flowers sprouted from the ground. What does it mean? Everyone looked a little confused and didn't understand the meaning of this mural at all. You all don't understand this, just put down your butcher knife and become a Buddha immediately, Xiong Tao said carelessly when he saw everyone staring at the relief in rapt attention. Don't tell me, when he said this, everyone really felt that this was what he meant. But, it's all feudalism, something to fool the masses. Captain Wang spat coldly, looking down on this kind of feudalism the most, and sneered, if this is the case, and those murderers suddenly repent, can they all become Buddhas? If so, wouldn't society be in chaos? Of course he has a reason for saying this. Although there are not many homicides, as a police officer, I have never seen all kinds of criminals. After being caught, these criminals will not say they regret it, but they really regret it. What? If you regret it, why do you still feel so crazy when you break the law? But no one paid attention to his remarks. Only Xiong Tao showed a rare look of recognition, while Su Tong and Yang Zixuan looked at the mural with particularly heavy expressions. I think, this is more like a sacrifice, Yang Zixuan said after a moment. After saying that, he turned around and looked at Su Tong, wanting to see what he had a different opinion. Unexpectedly, Su Tong just shook his shoulders, pointed at Xiong Tao and said, I think this guy is right. Put down the butcher knife and become a Buddha immediately. Well, as he said this, he did not forget to blink at Yang Guanjin behind him. This made Yang Guanjin startled and seemed a little uncomfortable. The unproductive suggestion made Yang Zixuan just roll his eyes, thinking he could say something different. There was no clear reason for these stone carvings, so everyone could only continue walking down. Hiss, that's not right. At this time, Yang Zixuan suddenly stopped, looked around and said, how do I feel that we have entered a temple? It doesn't look like some kind of immortality bureau. Your temple is built in this place? It would be strange to say there are no ghosts. Su Tong held his arms at the side. Most temples are built on the top of the mountain. They want to build them as high as the mountain is. It makes those who climb the mountain very tired, so that they can show their sincerity in worshipping Buddha. Even if they don't believe in Buddhism, they will climb it. When I went up to the temple, I felt that it was not easy to climb up. If I didn't pay my respects, I would lose even if I invested some money. This. Yang Zixuan scratched his head, and after thinking about it carefully, it seemed that this was true, and he couldn't help but laugh. The ancients also studied psychology. Come on, I found the source of that smell. At this time, Captain Wang's shout came from a distance, and everyone hurried over to take a look, only to see a huge bronze pot in front of them. The bronze pot was suspended in the air by several iron ropes, which were as thick as an adult's arm. A section of the iron rope was embedded in the surrounding stone pillars. Over the years, it was already covered with rust. Seeing everyone arriving, Captain Wang excitedly pointed at the bronze pot in front of him and sneered at Xiong Tao, I can tell you 100% now that the smell we smell is the smell of corpses. He pointed to the black traces left in the pot. This is corpse oil. Vomit. Suddenly Xiong Tao couldn't bear it anymore and opened his mouth to vomit again. Is such a big pot used to boil corpse oil? Yang Guanjin walked to the pot with a horrified look on his face. The pot was at least 5 meters wide and 3 meters deep, with a thick layer of black stuff inside. It's hard to imagine what it would look like if such a big pot was used to cook corpse oil. After she said this, everyone couldn't help but think of how chefs usually make lard, and then placed that image on this big pot. When they thought of the huge bronze pot filled with all kinds of white meat pieces rolling and frying, everyone could not help but shudder. What do they do with such a big pot of corpse oil? Captain Wang walked to the pot, probably out of professional reasons, and he couldn't help but start thinking. In addition to offering sacrifices, what else can we do? But we can't make hot pot. As Yang Zixuan spoke, he turned his eyes and saw Su Tong standing motionless. He couldn't help but stepped forward and said, "What are you thinking about? Do you feel like something is watching us?" Su Tong frowned. From the moment he walked in, he always felt a little uncomfortable. He always felt that something was observing him, and this feeling became stronger and stronger. At this time, he suddenly walked to the bushes, reached out and pulled on the bushes. Crash! He pulled off the dense rattan. As the rattan was torn off by him, a huge Buddha statue appeared in front of everyone. I don't know when the stone Buddha was carved, or it may be due to weathering, but most of the face of the Buddha has been corroded by the rain, so that it looks a bit silly instead of as solemn as in the temple. Feel. What made everyone even more weird was that there were densely packed jars placed under the Buddha statue. Look, not only the hot pot, but also the pickles are pickled. Yang Zixuan stepped forward half-jokingly, tore open the seal of a mud jar, and looked down. But there was actually a corpse sitting cross-legged inside. Su Tong came up and took a closer look. He reached out his hand and touched the jar. He shook his head and said, "It's not a corpse. It looks like a stone or clay sculpture." Yang Guanjin and Wang Dui also came over, and after careful study, they found that it was indeed a clay sculpture. And there was a dark solid liquid at the bottom of the jar. I heard that after the death of eminent Buddhist monks, their bodies are sealed in clay sculptures and placed in jars for 3 years. This is called sitting on an altar. Could these jars be the corpses of those eminent monks? Yang Guanjin said thoughtfully. It's possible, maybe these monks picked off their own flesh, made it into corpse oil and poured it into jars to achieve some kind of anti-corrosion effect. Yang Zixuan pointed to the dark oily object in the vat. Maybe this is the secret of the success of those eminent monks in sitting on the altar. Good guy, they have mass-produced it? Are they planning to become Buddhas collectively? After saying that, he thought about it. If you put it this way, this place is really a geomantic treasure. Otherwise, why would these monks be here and sit on the altar in large numbers? Captain Wang still responded with contempt for this vulgarity. If you die, you will die, and you deliberately made the body so mysterious. I think you are deceiving yourself and others. In his view, people are just piles of rotten meat after death. The country began to promote cremation in 1955, and it is said that some big cities have now begun to regulate it. But here, in such a desolate little place, the burial system is still maintained. Now it seems that it should be vigorously implemented as soon as possible. That's not right. At this time, Su Tong frowned and sniffed carefully at the jar. It doesn't smell right. It doesn't smell like corpse oil. Not corpse oil. Everyone came up and took a closer look, and sure enough they found that the smell in the jar no longer smelled like corpse oil, but instead had a tangy aroma. It must have some kind of spice added to it. Yang Zixuan guessed that after all, according to the rules of Buddhism, these physical Buddhas sitting on the altar still have to be taken out. If they smell bad, how can they fool the people into paying for them? While everyone was watching in rapt attention, Xiong Tao grabbed Yang Zixuan's arm and exclaimed, "He's alive." Everyone was startled and looked back, only to see Xiong Tao's face turned pale and his eyes fixed on the Buddha statue in front of them. Just now, I looked at him, and his eyeballs suddenly moved. Xiong Tao stammered and pointed at the Buddha statue. "Haha, you must have seen it wrong. This is just a piece of broken stone." Captain Wang looked at Xiong Tao's joke with cold eyes, walked up to the Buddha statue, patted the big feet of the Buddha statue, and said with disdain, "It's just a broken stone, let me move it for a while." As he spoke, Captain Wang slowly raised his head, and the smile on his face suddenly froze. He looked at the Buddha statue in front of him with his eyes widened, and saw that the eyes of the Buddha actually looked in his direction. What was supposed to be a simple and honest smile looked particularly weird at this moment. "Some guests came to the house today, and I was late to greet them, so I had to post a chapter of 4,000 words first. Sorry." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 44. Wu. The deep sound of the horn suddenly echoed in the king's ears, and time suddenly began to blur in front of his eyes. In a daze, when he opened his eyes again, he saw that there was a boiling bronze pot in front of him. The pot was filled with boiling steam, and the human corpses could be seen rolling in the boiling oil. "Where am I?" Team Wang's heart tightened, and he suddenly turned around. Su Tong and others behind him had long disappeared. Only the monk, covered in black robes, strolled towards him with a blood-stained blade in his hand. "Get away!" The look on Captain Wang's face changed suddenly, and he roared, but suddenly found that he couldn't move. At some point, two figures appeared beside him, one on the left and one on the right, lifting him up and facing him. "Walk in the direction of the bronze pot." In his sight, he saw the Buddha statue behind him flickering in and out of focus under the firelight. Those silent eyes were scanning down from above. Instead of the kindness of the Buddha, there was only a sinister cold light. Gilu. Watching the boiling oil pot getting closer and closer, Team Wang's expression became more and more frightened. He struggled desperately, but his limbs did not move at all, as if he had completely lost consciousness. He could only watch helplessly as he was carried on the iron in front of the pot. With a slight throw, the figure suddenly fell into the oil pot. Plop! The cold water instantly penetrated his collar. Su Tong slowly opened his eyelids, and what he saw was bottomless darkness and emptiness. Hallucination. At this time, several huge bubbles floated gurglingly under the water, and familiar sounds came from the bubbles. When he looked at them, his expression suddenly became serious. Some guys in straitjackets let out intrusive laughter, and twisted faces flashed in front of him through the blisters. He remembered the faces, but some memories had been blurred by time. Turning his head, the scene turned again, and he saw a delicate face emerging from another bubble. He smiled and took out a knife from his pocket. "Su Tong, do you know? Living is actually a disease. Only death is the cure for us." As he spoke, he put the knife on his neck and slashed lightly, and blood immediately dyed the entire bubble red. Seeing this, Su Tong's face began to look more and more ugly, his eyes were filled with bloodshot eyes, and his hands were struggling in the water. "Su Tong! Su Tong! Don't sleep, look at that shadow, if you fall asleep, he will eat you and take your place. The world is big, but do you believe it? In fact, we are just a grain of sand. Su Tong, you know, our life is like a book. After turning this chapter, there will be the next chapter. This is rebirth." There were more and more bubbles in front of me, and countless crazy words came from the bubbles. The chaotic memories of what he had seen and heard kept emerging before his eyes. Boom! Suddenly, as the bubbles burst, the world in front of him suddenly became quiet. A pair of huge eyes in the dark divine water slowly opened, with scarlet pupils staring at him. In the darkness, the Demon King with green face and fangs became more and more clear. The Demon King's arms were broken, and drops of black blood filled the water. His eyes were fixed on Su Tong. There was no sound or movement, but those scarlet eyeballs were as suffocating as a bottomless abyss. The two looked at each other for a moment, and he actually felt a special resonance, as if he was staring at himself through the devil's eyes, as if he was looking in a mirror. In a daze, he seemed to understand something, and stretched out his hand to grab the Demon King in front of him. However, the moment he stretched out his palm, a flute sound suddenly sounded in his ears. Wrong. Hearing the sound of the flute, Su Tong suddenly retracted his palm and suddenly raised his head to look at the demon statue in front of him. His eyes narrowed into a slit. You cut off your arms as a sign of letting go, and used the devil's mind to cross people's hearts. Little did you know that the human heart is like the sea, and the world is like a furnace. How could you just let it go when you said to let it go? You can't become a Buddha yourself, and you still want to cross other people's hearts. Become a Buddha. Why is there a worthless thing like you among the devils? Rumble, rumble. As if stimulated by his words, the demon in front of him shook, and countless bubbles emerged from the water, which were more fragmented memory fragments. Su Tong even saw himself being pinned down on the bed and forced to take a tranquilizer. But he was no longer moved by this. Instead, he watched calmly, as if he was an outsider watching a movie that had nothing to do with him. After a moment, he mocked, "You only have some means." As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed one of the bubbles. Inside the bubble was an old man with white hair. The old man was squatting in the corner, writing and carving on the wall with his bloody hands. The tips of his fingers had been worn to the point of exposing the bones, but he didn't even realize it. The paintings on the wall were also stained with blood and had a few crooked buttons. Looking at this familiar scene, Su Tong took a deep breath. This old man took good care of himself in the hospital. He would always leave the apples in his lunch for himself. He always said that he was a painter, but no one could paint his paintings. Understand? On this night, he suddenly started painting desperately. The day after he finished painting, the old man died in the ward. Do you think it's painful for him to be regarded as an alien in the eyes of others? But how do you understand that the things he painted are like a world, a pure land of bliss, in his eyes? As he spoke, he turned the bubble over in his hand, squinted one eye and looked again, and saw a stunning landscape painting in the room appearing in front of his eyes. Those twisted lines presented a completely different sense of impact. He doesn't understand what art is, but if he were to evaluate it, it is art, but it is art that ordinary people cannot understand. It's okay to hear the Tao in the morning and die in the evening. If you let go of this kind of spirit, I'm afraid you won't be able to catch it. As he spoke, he gently pushed out the bubbles in his hand. The floating bubbles suddenly fell quickly and hit the Demon King's face hard. With a dull sound, the Demon King's body in front of him suddenly fell apart. As the Demon King's body shattered, a huge thrust hit him, his eyes blurred for a moment, and his closed eyes suddenly woke up. I saw the five of them still standing in front of the Buddha statue. It's just that everyone's expressions on their faces were particularly weird. Captain Wang seemed to be stimulated by something, his face was dark and he didn't say a word. "Who? You finally woke up." Yang Guanjin held the flute, and it was obvious that the sound of the flute she just heard was played by her. The jar is indeed not entirely filled with corpse oil. It is also mixed with a kind of poison. Anyone who smells it will fall into hallucinations unconsciously. I am different from you. I am protected by Miao Gu and will wake up immediately. Otherwise, we are afraid. Don't even think about waking up for a while. Yang Guanjin explained to them. At this time, Yang Zixuan suddenly sat down on the ground, his whole body was soaked in cold sweat as if he had been fished out of the water. In his fantasy, he saw too many people who came to seek his life. These people seemed to be dragging him into the abyss. Looking back now, he couldn't help but break into a cold sweat. When he looked up at Xiong Tao again, he found that this guy didn't seem to have woken up from the hallucination. There was a smack in the corner of his mouth, and he was muttering, "Hamburgers, elbows, noodles, Coke, they are all mine." The corner of his mouth twitched. He knew that Xiong Tao was a fitness instructor in reality, but he didn't expect that these were the things that this guy was obsessed with. He stepped forward and slapped him hard. Crack. After 2 slaps, Xiong Tao's cheeks suddenly swelled up, and he woke up with a start. He looked at his empty hands with a blank look on his face. He found that the burger was gone and his elbow was gone. He couldn't help but smash his mouth, licked his tongue, and realized that he seemed to be dreaming. "There's something wrong with this place, let's leave quickly." Seeing that Xiong Tao had woken up, Su Tong immediately urged everyone to leave here as soon as possible. Hearing what he mentioned, Yang Zixuan immediately noticed something was wrong. The Buddha sitting on the altar was supposed to be opened after the time was up, and his body was taken out for worship. You can't just sleepwalk together every time you open a forum. This is unreasonable. Thinking of this, Yang Zixuan's heart tightened. Yes, leave quickly. But as soon as he finished speaking, there was a rustling sound all around, and the sound became louder and louder. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound, and saw a red thing suddenly emerging from the bushes. What is that? Captain Wang was startled when he saw these bright red things, which were as big as adults. They kept popping up their heads and had 2 slender hairy horns. 1, 2, and 1 red fruit kept popping up in the blink of an eye, and for a while the surroundings seemed to be covered with flowers. But wait for Captain Wang to get closer and take a closer look. When he saw the bright red fruit, it began to squirm slowly, and its sharp claws and dark and shiny back were poked out from under the green leaves. Hiss! A chill could not help but be breathed into his heart, like a basin of cold water pouring down from his head, chilling him from head to soul. What kind of fruit was that? It was clearly the head of a centipede. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 45. Although this place is close to Myanmar and borders Sichuan, he has seen all kinds of insects, but he has never seen such a big centipede, with its head bigger than his fist. In shock, Captain Wang was pulled back violently. At this moment, Centipede, who was still some distance away from Captain Wang, suddenly jumped out. The sharp mouthparts opened and spurted out ink-colored liquid. Zzz. When the venom was stained on the ground, a puff of black smoke suddenly appeared, and green bubbles appeared on the ground. When Captain Wang saw it, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. If no one had helped him, he probably would have sprayed it on him. Not on the face. By then disfigurement will be a trivial matter, and even your life will probably be at stake here. Thinking of this, he looked back and saw that the person behind him was Xiong Tao. Captain Wang felt a little embarrassed now. After all, he had been sarcastic about this guy just now. Fortunately, this was not the time to be polite. I saw those red-headed centipedes in the woods, swaying out of the woods as if they had smelled some delicious food. Run! Su Tong roared and ran back with everyone. As a result, as soon as they ran a few steps, Su Tong and the others were dumbfounded. They saw a pine forest and stone tower behind them, but it was not the route they came from. What's even more strange is that in the pine forest, rows of corpses of monks are sitting neatly. Just like the mummies they saw outside before, each corpse is in the posture of worship. Anyone else would feel terrified, but they didn't care about it at the moment, because the rustling sound behind them made their scalps tingle just by hearing it. This way. Yang Guanjin pointed forward, which was the direction where all the monks knelt and worshipped. It was supposed to be where they were most likely to find what they were looking for. But when everyone followed their gaze, they saw no building anywhere. There was only a sheep farm path, and they didn't know where it led. If they looked carefully, there was a deep valley below. The deep valley is covered by thick woods. Listen carefully to the sound of water flowing. If you don't look carefully, you won't know that there is a cave here. Yang Zixuan walked in front, opening his palms, and a ball of light suddenly emerged from his palms, illuminating the surrounding area. It was getting darker and darker as we walked down the valley, and we could even smell a faint rancid smell in the air, but strangely, the centipedes didn't seem to be chasing them down. Do you think this place is really a geomantic treasure? Xiong Tao looked at the bottomless path ahead and couldn't help but question it. After all, the Feng Shui treasures in everyone's mind are all famous Taoist mountains, such as Wudane, Shaolin, Longhu Mountain, Lejun Mountain, and other places, which reach into the sky and are close to heaven and man. And why does this immortal Ascension Bureau go underground instead, like a grave that cannot be seen in the light? But no one could explain this problem to him. While they were talking, the five of them had already reached the bottom of the valley. A cool breeze blew over them, giving them a chilly feeling. The temperature seemed to have dropped by more than 10 degrees, as if they had walked into a large refrigerator. Yang Zixuan raised the ball of light in his hand and looked forward. He saw a silvery light shining in front of him. It was a small river flowing out of the mountain stream. There were actually ice hanging on both sides of the river. The temperature here is obviously not that cold, so it's no wonder those centipedes didn't chase them down anymore. After just a few steps, a thin layer of frost already hung on their eyebrows. We can't leave anymore. We have to find a way to stay warm, otherwise we may all suffer from hypothermia. Su Tong called out to Yang Zixuan, who was walking in front. He and Xiong Tao both had powerful prop cards, but he, Team Wang, and Yang Guanjin did not. The surrounding temperature was already below freezing, and the thin clothes they wore could not protect their body temperature at all. Once symptoms of hypothermia appeared, they would be in big trouble. I have 2 sets of clothes here. You put them on first. Upon hearing this, Yang Zixuan took out 2 sets of thicker clothes from the prop book and handed them over. Su Tong gave one to Yang Guanjin and the other to Team Wang. He put on the deerskin coat that was originally given to Yang Zixuan. Speaking of which, the clothes went around in a circle, but unexpectedly, it finally ended up around him. After putting on his clothes, he felt much warmer immediately. Then, with the bright ball of light in Yang Zixuan's hand, Su Tong glanced around. At this time, he suddenly noticed something and pulled Yang Zixuan forward a few steps. As Yang Zixuan pointed the light in his hand at the solid ice in front of him, he saw a woman's face emerging from under the ice. The two of them immediately looked at each other. Yang Zixuan swallowed and looked down with the light ball on his hand. He saw that the woman was naked and naked. Her snow-white skin could even be seen through the ice. Before Yang Zixuan could reach down, Su Tong grabbed his wrist and moved the light ball to the other side. However, the same was true of the ice on the side. Under the ice was a girl, who seemed to be underage. Why are there still women? Suddenly Captain Wang poked his head over, took a closer look, frowned, and cursed, I think this place is a cult den, even a child as young as this is not spared. Stop talking, keep walking quickly, the time for my Xian light technique is almost up. Yang Zixuan pushed Su Tong and Wang Dui aside, urging them to move forward. Sure enough, before they had gone far, the original light suddenly dimmed. Apparently the time for Xianguang technique has come. Fortunately, although there was no Xianguang technique to illuminate the road, the ice in front of them was refracted with weak light. After everyone got used to it, they could barely see the way ahead clearly. The weak light is refracted through the ice and onto the water. After being refracted by the water, the ice cave in front of you suddenly gives people a different feeling. However, what really made them feel uncomfortable was that after the light faded, they could see more clearly the women sealed in the ice around them. They could see one almost every few steps they took. I don't know how long the 5 people walked along the path, but suddenly the light in front dimmed. No matter how good their eyesight is, the five of them can only vaguely see the flickering lights and shadows on the water. It's windy in front, and it feels warm. Maybe there's an exit in front of us. Please be careful, hold hands, and don't get separated. Yang Zixuan walked in the front and took a deep breath. He could feel a stream of heat blowing from the depths of the cave in front. Although the heat in the wind was very small, he could still feel it on his cold face, even a little itchy. It's like having your face turn white from the cold in the middle of winter, and suddenly someone blows a breath of hot air on your face. As he spoke, he stretched out his palm and took Yang Guanjin's hand behind him. Yang Guanjin held onto Xiong Tao, and Xiong Tao turned around and held Su Tong's hand. However, just when Su Tong turned around and stretched out his hand towards the king behind him, suddenly he froze. Doesn't it feel right? He turned back to look at the king team behind him. I saw the blurry shadow in the darkness, slowly handing his hand towards him. When I stretched out my hand, it turned out to be ice cold. When I touched it carefully, there were still some ice shards on my fingers. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 46. Team King. Su Tong raised his eyebrows and asked tentatively. The shadow in the darkness didn't reply, but just nodded. Hiss. He took a deep breath, clenched his hand a little tighter, then glanced at Xiong Tao who was walking in front, and let go of Xiong Tao's hand with a shake of his hand. You go first, I will tie my shoelaces. Xiong Tao didn't know why and didn't think much about it. He just said hurry up and continued walking forward. Fluorescent lights were shining in the darkness. Su Tong took the cold little hand behind him and groped towards another road step by step, then slowly. As he walked, he said, Captain Wang, there is actually something I want to confess to you. No. Confession is not right either. It should be, surrender. As he said this, he took the hand and walked forward. At the same time, he quietly called out the two paper figures and threw them into the darkness. Ahem, actually I got your big baby. I've liked masturbating since I was a child. I couldn't help it when I saw your big baby, so I took it and shot it a few times. Boys, who doesn't like to masturbate? As he spoke, he pulled his hand and pulled the shadow in the darkness closer. As the shadow came closer, the blurred outline gradually became clearer, but he still couldn't see her facial features, but she could see her long hair flowing on her shoulders. Superior. Captain Wang, look what that is. He pointed forward with his hand, and the shadow was stunned for a moment, but before he had time to see clearly what it was, he suddenly felt Su Tong's hand push gently, and someone seemed to lift him up under his feet. Immediately after the sound of pop, the shadow disappeared into the deep pool in front of me. Looking at the splashing water on the water, Su Tong clapped his hands and shouted downward, Captain Wang, I will just surrender myself. After saying that, I saw sparkling waves on the water, and the blurry shadow slowly floated up from the water, waving his hands towards him and screaming caca from his mouth. Su Tong waved his hand, but walked back without looking back. However, before he took 2 steps, his steps suddenly froze, and he stared straight at the 2 shadows in the darkness in front of him. The shadow figure floated forward silently with small steps, and then in the faint light, one of the shadow figures slowly raised his hand. It was a pale and slender palm. You could see the joints of the Turks. It was delicate and tangible. It was a woman's hand. If it were in another place, I might admire it and wonder if the mistress of this palm would be as beautiful as this hand. But right now, I'm just fooling around, and I really can't get interested. At this moment, the woman on the left suddenly rushed forward. Her originally slender and tender palms were now as hard as iron. She grabbed his shoulders and pulled him hard, trying to pull him into her arms. However, the moment she pulled Su Tong into her arms, one hand grabbed the woman's throat first, devil's power. The moment demon power was activated, light blue flames suddenly burned in his palm. With the light of the fire, he could clearly see the face of the woman in front of him. She has a tall nose, a cherry-like mouth, a touch of blush on her face, and heavy makeup, like a newlywed, but there are no pupils in her eyes, only a touch of gray light. The magic flame stained the woman's hair and instantly set her head on fire. Zhizhizzy. A weird scream suddenly came out of the woman's mouth, and she saw that the woman's mouth was suddenly opened by something under the magic flames. Su Tong took a closer look and saw a fat gray worm in the woman's mouth. It was twisting inside, as if it was trying to get out. Zhizhizzy. The fire damage attached to the demonic power is actually not strong. Even if it ignites the woman's head, it does not burn the skin and flesh like an open flame. But since this kind of bug is parasitic in such a cold place, it is obvious that it is very harsh on temperature changes. As long as there is a little temperature, they will not be able to stand it. I saw the bug twisting its plump butt crazily, trying to crawl out of the woman's mouth, but as soon as it exposed its butt and crawled out, it was directly poked back with a finger. Suddenly, the insect screamed like a puppy, twisted its body, and turned its chubby head. It was a cherry pink head with big, black, jewel-like eyes and round chubby eyes. With his pouting little mouth, he let out a mournful scream towards Su Tong. However, Su Tong just smiled, raised his hand and punched the female corpse on the chin. Boom! With the blessing of demonic power, he punched the female corpse's chin and dented it directly. There was an explosion from inside, and milky white liquid suddenly spurted out from the corners of her mouth and nasal cavity. After getting rid of the female corpse, Su Tong kicked the corpse towards the other female corpse. When the other female corpse was knocked down, the first thing he did when he turned around was, run. Are you kidding? If you don't run away, are you still looking for death? The effect of demon power only lasts for 30 seconds. After it ends, it will enter a cooling period. There are other prop cards on him. But the problem is it's not worth it. Just like the arrival of the devil, of course he can easily kill the female corpse behind him after activating it, but the problem is that the sequelae will break out, and he may not be able to bear it in this kind of ice cave. Except for Red Mandarin Lantern, which cannot be used, there are not many prop cards that can be used, including Paper Craftsman's Book, Evil Bell and Devil's Power. And when Yang Zixuan reached a cooperation with him before, he gave himself a prop card called Angry One. It comes with a skill: the angrier the person is, the stronger the temporary boost is. But he is just mentally ill, not an angry person, so how can he use his unlimited anger? In terms of practicality, we should also mention the Leopard Soul Cloak, which passively increases movement speed by 20%. It does not cost any script points or add burden. It is simply a must-have for escaping. Now it seems that Yang Zixuan is right. Although the effect of prop cards is powerful, if a suitable combination cannot be made, the amplification effect it can bring is indeed limited. He ran forward in the dark, and he didn't know how long he ran, but suddenly he found a problem. He seemed to be going in the wrong direction. But seeing the sparkling light in front of him, he could vaguely see a path ahead. At this time, he didn't care much and ran towards the path. After not running far, the light in front of him gradually began to brighten. He carefully followed the direction of the light and walked forward. After a while, I actually heard bursts of women's laughter. At first he thought he heard it wrong, but when he pricked up his ears and listened carefully, he saw that it was indeed a woman's laughter. Is there still a ghost in this place? If it were anyone else in a place like this, hearing this burst of intrusive laughter, they would probably be scared to death. But it happened to be Su Tong. Listening to the voice, he felt a strong sense of curiosity in his heart, wanting to see what kind of fairy sister the owner of this laughter was. Thinking of this, he carefully slowed down his pace and walked tiptoe in the direction of the sound. When he passed a corner, Su Tong cautiously poked his head out to take a look. Huh! His eyes lit up, as if he had discovered something interesting. What I saw was a huge water pool in front of me. The water pool was shrouded in white smoke, and a pavilion stood on the water, seemingly invisible in the white mist. But what was even more strange was that there were vague figures of women in the pavilion. They were covered with white silk. He wanted to see more clearly, but he couldn't see clearly. But he couldn't see the women clearly, but he discovered something very interesting. He actually saw Captain Wang. At this moment, Captain Wang was tied to a large wooden board and was lifted up by a naked woman, standing outside the pavilion. That scene was just like in the TV series. The concubine who was going to sleep for the emperor was washed and wrapped in a quilt and waited outside the palace. How did he get here? Su Tong felt curious. At this moment, he suddenly glanced away and saw several women's clothes hanging on a tree branch not far away. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly and groped for them quietly and calmly. The laughter in the pavilion became more and more harsh. Captain Wang, who had been comatose for who knows how long, finally opened his eyelids and looked at himself tied to the wooden board. He was stunned for a moment. Is this another hallucination? But after struggling for a while, I realized that something was not quite right. So he began to struggle desperately. As a result, when he moved, the four women carrying him did not move their bodies, but their heads turned around in unison. The gray-white pupils stared at him, instantly sending a chill through Captain Wang's body, and a cold air rushed straight to his head. What made him even more distraught was that behind him, he saw four women slowly opening their mouths. Their jaws seemed to have been removed. They were like the mouths of snakes, growing bigger and bigger, and then they heard kick. Crack. With a sound, a huge insect poked its head out of their mouths. Seeing this, Captain Rao Shi Wang was frightened and overwhelmed no matter how hard his heart was and his firm belief in Marxism. Fortunately, at this time, the laughter in the pavilion became more and more harsh. The four women finally turned their heads, and Captain Wang breathed a sigh of relief. But before the breath could come out of his mouth, he suddenly felt a cold feeling in his ears. It felt like a hand was touching his earlobe. He was suddenly frightened and every hair on his body felt tense. Stand up. When he dared to look up, he saw a figure standing above his head under the white sleeves in front of him. It's over. Are you going to eat me? Captain Wang's heart skipped a beat, and he closed his eyes as if resigned to his fate, hoping that his death would not be too painful. However, that hand was groping around his body, and every time its fingers touched any place, the muscles on Captain Wang's face could not help but tremble violently. Just as the hand was gradually groping for his wrist, Captain Wang suddenly felt something. He stretched out his hand to grab it, and something cold fell into his hand. When he opened his eyes and took a look, he found a shining silver knife. Knife. He was stunned, turned his head and looked sideways, and saw Su Tong squinting at him. When he saw his eyes looking at him, he slowly stretched out his finger and put it to his mouth, shh. After saying that, he pinched his fingers and pointed at the pavilion in front of him. Captain Wang followed the direction he pointed and raised his head to take a look. Hiss. A breath of cold air was sucked into his mouth, and his expression suddenly became extremely ugly. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 47. I saw four women in white clothes in the pavilion, holding a deer carcass and chewing it with relish. From time to time, I could hear weird laughter coming from their mouths. If you listen carefully, you will easily find that it is not laughter at all, but the sound of the bugs in their mouths. Su Tong was wearing a woman's clothes and stood behind, watching curiously. I couldn't help but wonder, are these women humans, insects, or should I say corpses? But whether they are humans, insects, or even corpses, how long have they existed in such a place, and why can they survive? And this place, what exactly is it? Ascension Bureau? Of course not. He was sure that this place might be a temple or the tomb of an emperor, but it definitely had nothing to do with the so-called Shangxian Bureau. These questions appeared in his mind, making him unable to help but want to explore the truth. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Just as he was looking at it, he heard a strange sound coming from his ears. When he looked back, Captain Wang was looking at him with his lips pursed and his eyes wide open, gesticulating desperately at him. As if signaling him to help, the two ran away together. But Su Tong had no interest in paying attention to him. Seeing that he looked impatient, he could only sigh helplessly, quietly walked to him, and stretched out his hand calmly. Then, under the shocked eyes of the king, the wrist that he finally struggled to free was stuffed back into the noose, and a beautiful bow was carefully tied on him. What are you going to do? Suddenly, Captain Wang was completely confused. Wasn't he here to save himself? Why did you tie yourself up? He was so angry that he wanted to curse, but when the words came to his mouth, he only dared to curse like a mosquito. Are you sick? Please help me quickly. Do you want to see me being eaten by these monsters? Although Su Tong was almost furious in his heart, Captain Wang still controlled his emotions as much as possible and said to Su Tong. However, Su Tong stood aside, with a face as stiff as those women's, without saying a word or even making any movement. These kings were completely embarrassed. Boy, did you humming do this on purpose? Let me go immediately. He roared angrily, hoping to get Su Tong to let him go quickly, and they would find a way to get out of here quickly. As a result, despite this roar, Su Tong remained silent. Instead, the four women who were eating deer in the pavilion finally looked at him. The woman slowly put down the venison in her hand, shook her limbs stiffly, and made a kick sound in her mouth. The four women carrying the king immediately stepped into the pavilion, then put him on the table and let him lie on it in a pose with the character. Now Captain Wang's originally pale face could no longer see even a trace of blood. The four women twisted their necks and crawled on top of him. Even though the temperature here was frighteningly cold, Captain Wang could still clearly smell the strong rotten smell on their bodies when they got closer. Feeling like vomiting, the four women actually tore their clothes apart and touched his chest with their cold fingers. It felt like they were giving themselves a bath with dried loofah. Team Wang never dreamed that he would be molested by four female corpses. I didn't expect that I didn't die on the battlefield or at the hands of those criminals. In the end, I was killed by your boy. Boy, you can do it? Lieutenant Wang lay on the wooden board, his eyes helpless as he looked at the crystal tears that were left on the ground, but he still did not forget to sarcastically say to Su Tong, the Skynet is sparse and not leaking. If you don't want others to know, you can't do anything except yourself. At the end of the sentence, Captain Wang's throat almost went dry. However, after waiting for a long time, there was no pain in waiting for these female corpses to tear themselves into pieces. After groping for a while on Captain Wang's body, they slowly turned around and jumped into the cold pool one after another. Su Tong stood behind and watched silently. He saw that the woman who jumped into the pool kept walking deeper and deeper into the pool, and her body was actually covered with a layer of frost visible to the naked eye. The woman kept walking forward, but the temperature in the cold pool seemed to be far beyond ordinary people's imagination. After the woman took a few steps, her body suddenly became much shorter. When she looked carefully, she found that her legs had turned into ice and cracked on the water. Su Tong frowned as he watched, not knowing what these insect girls were going to do. At this moment, the woman stretched out her hand and groped under the pool for a while, and actually picked up a jar from below. As soon as the jar came out of the water, it was immediately covered with a layer of frost visible to the naked eye, which froze the woman's hands firmly on top. When the woman took a few steps back, her body was completely unable to move. At this time, the second woman who jumped into the water stepped forward to take the jar from her hand like a baton, and walked back holding the jar. But he still didn't get far before his body was completely covered by a layer of ice. Next was the third one, because the first two had already carried the jar out of the coldest area. She persisted for more than 10 seconds and reluctantly walked step by step to a few meters away from the pavilion before finally stopping. Seeing this, the fourth woman finally entered the water. She took the jar tremblingly and walked back carefully. No one knew what was in the jar, but judging from her careful expression, it seemed that there was something very important inside. However, just as she was holding the jar in front of the pavilion, a pair of large, generous hands gently took the ice-cold jar from her hand. The woman was stunned for a moment, her gray-white eyes looking at the unfamiliar face in front of her in confusion, as if she was still thinking about something. The mouth slowly opened, revealing a shriveled insect. The insect's tentacles shook desperately in the air, making a squeaking sound. At this time, Su Tong finally saw the complete picture of these bugs. Part of their bodies had actually been completely connected to the female corpse. He even discovered that there was no flesh and blood in the mouth of the female corpse. He could even see the decayed bones through the woman's mouth. It seems that the reason why these women still look like humans is because the bugs have developed many fleshy threads as thin as hair, supporting the women's skin. Seeing this, he couldn't help but think of a young man in the hospital. He always said that he was the real human being, but most of the human beings in the world were actually parasitized. The reason why humans suffer from illness and death is because these terrible parasites are constantly eating away at human life and making humans grow older. As long as these parasites are killed, the lifespan of Zhang Sanfan and Peng Ziu can be greatly extended. Of course, what he said was not credible. But now it seems that these bugs rebuilt a new circulatory system in the corpse, which allowed the female corpse to be preserved until now. At first glance, it still looks like a living person. No wonder. He nodded thoughtfully, feeling suddenly enlightened. No wonder these bugs are so sensitive to temperature. It seems that not only are they sensitive to temperature, but also it seems that only in such an extremely cold environment, the corpses they inhabit will not decay quickly. Hizzy. Just when he was thinking wildly, the bug in the mouth of the female corpse in front of him seemed to finally realize that something was wrong, and let out a sharp roar. As a result, Su Tong fiercely took the jar from her hand, raised his leg and kicked the female corpse's head directly into the cold pool. Plop, there was a sound, and the woman's body was still struggling, but the temperature in the cold pool had obviously exceeded their critical point, and there was no movement at all after a short struggle. Quick, quick, help me untie the rope. Upon seeing this, Captain Wang quickly called Su Tong to untie the rope for him. Su Tong's fingers hooked lightly on the bow knot, and the end of the rope that Team Wang couldn't free was easily untied. You kid, you used me as bait and didn't say hello in advance. What if they tore me apart? Once Captain Wang regained his freedom, he immediately got up angrily, as if he wanted to make Su Tong look good. Su Tong disagreed with this, staring at the frozen jar in his hand. Instead, he curiously asked Captain Wang, "Guess what's inside?" Although Captain Wang's face was full of dissatisfaction, of course he was still full of curiosity when he saw the jar in his hand. However, the jar seems to be frozen, and it doesn't seem to be easy to open. This is not easy. Su Tong picked up the jar and threw it on the ground. Boom! With a huge smashing sound, the jar was smashed to pieces, and inside the jar was an egg the size of an adult's fist. What made them even more unexpected was that the moment the jar shattered, there was a sudden burst of strange screams all around. Soon there was a sound of footsteps, as if something was running towards them crazily. "I think we are in trouble," Hearing the sound of running footsteps, Captain Wang couldn't help but feel his scalp numb. As he spoke, he looked in the direction of Su Tong and saw him picking up the egg. Then he grinned at him. Run. Wait for me. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 48. The two of them ran all the way, and the light in front of them was getting better and better, but the strange thing was that they were clearly running downhill, as if they were going downhill. After taking a look at the vaguely visible corridor ahead, Captain Wang began to mutter, "Isn't this the wrong way? Why do I feel like we are running deeper and deeper? This is the only road. If you don't run, you'll die." Su Tong ran at the front, with no intention of stopping. He threw the egg into the prop book to see what it was. When I threw it in, I was disappointed. Unknown items, please identify them yourself. This makes me a little depressed. I didn't expect that the things I brought need to be appraised, but something is always better than nothing. Those bugs attach so much importance to this egg, it can be imagined that it must be a good thing. Team Wang, who was following behind him, wanted to say something after hearing Su Tong's words, but the rapid footsteps behind him got closer and closer. He turned around and took a hasty look, and his whole body shivered instantly. He saw that the women were not running at all, but crawling on the ground like insects, faster than the two of them could run. Quick! I saw a female corpse. Perhaps it was not maintained well enough, or perhaps accidentally, the neck suddenly broke, leaving only a layer of skin. When it was about to fall off, it ended up being held in one of her hands. He did not forget to scream, "Zhizhizhi! My grandma!" Such a fierce scene really overturned Captain Wang's three views. He screamed, his speed suddenly increased, and he actually jumped over Su Tong. Team Wang ran forward with his head tied up, his mind already in a mess. He was determined that he was an atheist, and those so-called gods and ghosts were all futile ideas and things that fooled the people. The hallucination seen above when the corpse was sitting on the altar can be explained by poisoning. So how should we explain these female corpses in front of us? This unscientific. As he was thinking wildly, Captain Wang suddenly felt his feet were empty, and his eyes suddenly started to spin. As soon as it was delayed, a hand grabbed his collar from behind, lifted him up, and pulled him back. "Don't you watch the road?" Su Tong pointed forward. Team Wang took a closer look and suddenly felt dizzy. He saw that there was a bottomless abyss in front of him. If he hadn't been pulled up, he would have fallen and been shattered into pieces. What should I do? There is no way ahead. Otherwise, let's fight with these things. Seeing that there was no way forward, Captain Wang calmed down and turned back with a cold face. No. There's still a way. Su Tong squinted and looked ahead carefully, opened his palm, and saw a piece of paper flying from his hand, floating to the opposite side of the cliff. He and the paper man had a feeling of being connected, and he could clearly feel through the paper man that there was an inconspicuous cave on the opposite side of the cliff, about 5 meters below them. Look at that. He pointed to the position of the paper figure below and asked Captain Wang to take a closer look. Captain Wang took a closer look and found that it was indeed a cave. There is a way. He was overjoyed, but what followed was a bit of a dilemma. How can we get across such a long distance? As he said that, he bent down and took a closer look. He made a simple calculation in his mind. It was at least almost 10 meters away. Even if he wanted to speed up and jump over, it might not be easy. And if something goes wrong, what awaits them is an abyss of destruction. However, reality did not give them a chance to think. He heard the weird screams coming closer and closer behind him, and when he looked back, he saw that the female corpses were already chasing after him. Especially the head of the female corpse at the head was really missing this time, and it was connected by a thin layer of flesh. Damn it! Looking at the female corpse leading the charge, Team Wang's face trembled. This way, I'll count 1, 2, 3, and we jump together. Even if we fall, it's better than dying in the hands of those corpses. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Su Tong beside him already took a quick step and rushed towards these female corpses. Why? Seeing Su Tong charging towards the female corpse, Captain Wang was stunned for a moment. He seemed to see his comrades rushing to the front line in a trance. His eyes suddenly turned red and he slapped his thigh. You brat, you are so bloody, I'll stay with you until the end. Originally, he was not optimistic about this brat named Chen, but until now, this brat actually still has such a bloody spirit, which made Captain Wang's face red and hot for a moment. Can he still let this brat compete with him? However, just as he was about to rush towards these female corpses and fight them to the death, Su Tong's figure was seen rushing in front of these female corpses, but what Team Wang never expected was that less than half a meter away from the female corpses, this guy's body suddenly stopped, and his toes spun on the ground, perfectly showed a beautiful sharp turn. At the same time, a leopard shadow suddenly appeared on his body. It was the skill of Leopard Soul Cloak, Leopard Attack. It consumes 2 script points. After activation, your linear movement speed will be temporarily increased by 80%. Coupled with the 20% movement increase of the passive effect, the movement speed is temporarily doubled. He suddenly raised his head, his eyes burning with blazing fire, which made Captain Wang, whose face was full of astonishment, suddenly have a bad premonition in his heart. In just a few steps, his ears were filled with the whistling wind. Coupled with the acceleration of the downhill inertia, his speed exceeded the limit that normal people could achieve. Catch. Seeing Captain Wang's face full of astonishment, he took a deep breath, his expression became even more fanatical, stretched out his arm, grabbed Captain Wang's collar, and jumped forward. Don't. I'm not ready yet, accompanied his scream. For a moment, Captain Wang's eyes blurred, his body was already in the air, and he couldn't help but hold his breath. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. As far as the eye could see, the female corpses had rushed to the edge of the cliff, waving their palms feebly towards their figures. Boom! Finally, with a loud sound of pain, Captain Wang's vision went dark, and his body involuntarily turned somersaults on the ground. He rolled several times before finally stopping. Although his head hurt, as if a bag had been knocked out of his forehead, when his hands touched the ground, Captain Wang finally let out a long breath from his heart. As if he suddenly remembered something, he opened his eyes suddenly, stepped forward, and pulled Su Tong up from the ground, and yelled, "You are crazy. This is an abyss. If you fall down, your body will be gone. This kid jumps as fast as he wants. Didn't he think about what might happen if he fails?" Facing Captain Wang's angry eyes, Su Tong just grinned. He tilted his head and looked at the female corpses on the opposite cliff. His smile became more and more unrestrained. "Didn't you say it? Even if you fall to death, it is better than dying on the cliff. These female corpses have strong hands." Team Wang was startled, then pointed at Su Tong. He could no longer hold back the smile on his face, patted his shoulder, punched him on the shoulder, and cursed with a smile. "Good boy, I thought you were going to go up and fight those female corpses, but you have to tell me what you are going to do next time." I was not prepared at all and almost peed in fear. Recalling the feeling of hanging and falling just now, Team Wang couldn't help but feel a wave of fear in his heart. Hearing this, Su Tong couldn't help but joked, "You are Captain Wang. You are really not afraid of those gangsters. How can you be afraid of this?" Captain Wang just smiled when he heard this and looked up at the female corpses on the cliff. "Afraid? Everyone is afraid of death. When I first arrested a drug dealer, I was so scared that the hand holding the gun was shaking, but wearing this outfit, even if you go to mountains, seas, and seas of fire, you must not be vague when it's time to go up." He pointed to the 5-pointed star on his shoulder strap. "This is the weight of responsibility. Su Tong couldn't help but froze when he heard the words. He looked at the five-pointed star on Captain Wang's shoulder and was a little lost for a moment. It's not advisable to stay here for a long time, let's leave first. Captain Wang patted him, which brought Su Tong back to his senses. The two of them glanced at the cave behind them, then stepped forward and groped inside. In fact, the cave is not deep, and it is actually a huge cave inside. There are stone steps and canals around the cave, as if someone had lived here before. It's just that the years have changed, and now these stone steps have become particularly smooth, and they can only step on half of them, so both of them have to be more careful when walking. The cave was actually not very big. After the two climbed up the steps, they discovered a huge crystal bed. Someone lived here before. Team Wang stepped forward and carefully inspected the bottles and cans around him. It was hard to believe that there were people living in this place. After all, there are so many female corpses and bugs outside. Who has nothing to eat and nothing to do, and why are they hiding in this place? Su Tong didn't say anything. He walked to the corner and picked up a shovel. This shovel looked very special. It was not parallel, but a concave shovel. After rummaging around, he actually found a rope and a flying hook. Looking at these things, Su Tong couldn't help but frown. Maybe, the people who live here are not the owners of this place themselves. What's the meaning? Team Wang looked back at him, and Su Tong pointed at the tools on the ground. Although they looked a bit old, they were definitely no more than 50 years old. But most of the buildings here have existed for a long time. Considering the characteristics of these tools, he couldn't help but suspect that the person living here might be a tomb robber. As he spoke, he walked to the crystal bed, caressed the crystal bed with his hands, and found that the bed was actually covered with a thin layer of silver cotton. He stretched out his hand to pick up the cotton, but when he lowered his head, he saw that under the cotton silk, there was actually a small workbook. There was no need for him to make any more guesses now, as what he said had already been confirmed. With curiosity, he picked up the workbook and saw a diary written densely on it with neat pen calligraphy, and the diary was the first on the first line of the page. A 4-character title suddenly appeared. Tomb of the Spiritual Goo King. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 49. March 8, 1956. I have been digging for almost 5 days, and I can confirm that this strange tomb is the tomb of the legendary Goo King. It's ridiculous. I don't know who built a temple outside. I don't know if it is to suppress the goo insects here, or to explore the secrets of the goo insects. But it seems that these monks themselves went crazy first. Hee, it's really interesting. March 12th. Damn, this place is so damn evil. I almost lost my life here today. It's like a big poisonous cave, full of bugs. Fortunately, I invited Uncle Lu from the Bai family to calm down the situation, otherwise I, Hu Laokai, would have been responsible for this. March 17th. Oh my god, I have never seen this thing in my life. I asked Uncle Lu what that thing was, and Uncle Lu actually said that he didn't know either. Hey, even an old fairy like Uncle Lu doesn't know, it must be a good thing, but it's a pity that you can't take it. But from what he meant, this thing seemed to be related to longevity. No, I'm going to go in again tomorrow to see what's underneath. March 18th. Ha ha ha, I couldn't find anything else, but I found a crystal bed. Unfortunately, this thing is too big. My Ruyi flying hook can only drag it here, but I can't drag it out. Forget it, just stay here and lie down, it's always more comfortable than sleeping on the ground. I'll go there again tomorrow to see if I can get some valuable treasures. March 19th. Why do I always have a bad feeling today? I'll go down again. If I can't come up, just think I'm dead. Anyway, this place can be regarded as a geomantic treasure. March 22. I, Mr. Huchi, am back. Well, actually I have been back for 2 days, but I really can't bring myself to write a diary, but I feel bored if I don't write. Damn it, it would be nice to have someone to talk to in this place. If I had known better, I would have brought Zayadumia. No, the little bean sprouts are so small. If I die, how will they survive? Isn't my old Hu family going to be extinct? I should bring my eldest brother's son here. What's his name? Huan Kong, what a shabby name. He still brought 5 kilograms of pork. Please ask for the name written by the old Juran. Ba, the Qing dynasty died. Looking at the diary in his hand, Su Tong unknowingly went to the crystal bed. He felt that the diary looked more interesting than reading a novel. This guy who calls himself Master Hu Chi is either a talkative or a sullen coquettish guy. There is a strong sense of complaining in every word. But in addition to complaining, the information in the diary not only confirmed my suspicions, but also proved that this place was really not some bullshit immortality bureau, but a mysterious Miao tomb. Moreover, Hu Qi seemed to be possessed by Zhao Zilong. He had been in and out of this tomb several times. This cave seems to be his temporary residence. Looking at the bottles and jars around, it seems that many people live here. Now even a guy like Su Tong, who is not afraid of anything, can't help but admire Hu Qi. After all, it was written in the diary that this place is a big poison cave, full of poisonous insects, and female corpses parasitized by the insects. If you dare to live here, you are not ordinary. Also, who is Uncle Lu mentioned in the diary? Didn't he say he was the only one? Out of curiosity, he simply lay down on the crystal bed and began to read it seriously. It can be seen that Hu Qi is really bored here sometimes, and the next few days in the diary are filled with bits and pieces of his complaints. For example, the female corpse disciple here has an appearance, but in fact, the internal muscle structure has become like a dried loofah, tightly controlled by insects. He speculated that the reason why the appearance of the female corpses did not rot was not only the low temperature here, but also that their skin and flesh might have been processed in a special way. The diary also mentioned the cold pool where they came. Hu Qi actually tried to go down, but he almost froze to death inside. The diary said that underneath the cold pool, there were all crystallized corpses. In addition to human corpses, there were also bug corpses. It seemed that there was the nest of bugs, or their cemetery. In short, after Hu Qi passed the test once, he never went to that place again. After turning 2 pages further, the content began to become more radical. The first day of April. Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it, I shouldn't have come to this hellish place. The second day of April. I don't believe that a small Miao Gu King can defy the heavens. I am a disciple of the Ma family and I am not afraid of getting into trouble. I'm going to go in again tonight, and this time I'm going to find out what's going on. If I can't clear this place up, I'll use explosives to blow up this place. April 5th. I think maybe I made a mistake. I found the guy buried inside, but it was empty, no body at all. I found a monument, but I couldn't understand what was written on it. Damn it, if I had known this, I should have brought my American camera. It was a treasure that my uncle brought back to me from the United States. However, it's so strange. Since the coffin is empty, why do you spend so much effort to create such a weird tomb? I always feel that I really want to ignore something, but no, I have to think about it carefully. I plan to cast a spell tonight and invite Uncle Lu out again. This old guy has been devouring my old Hu family for generations. If I ask him to help me, I will always do it. It's early April, it should be the 8th day of the lunar month. Sure enough, what I expected was right, that thing is really not dead. Uncle Lou said that he might have succeeded in cultivating it. It's a pity that you can't see the look in this old man's eyes. Oh my God, it's just like the 30-year-old bachelor at the entrance of the village who saw the kill sister, his eyes glowed green. But he was pregnant with envy and jealousy. Unfortunately, his physical body was not here. He only had the attractor card, and even if he wanted to swallow it, he couldn't do it. But this thing is very evil. If he is allowed to continue to live, he might cause some trouble. I think the temple above is probably used to suppress him. But unfortunately, the monks in the temple were all useless, and they failed to suppress him. Instead, they were all led into evil ways by him. But I can't defeat him. Why don't I go back first and get Uncle Liu's legal body and golden body? That's a good idea. The beginning of April, cross out, love the first few days of the month. Bastard, I'm trapped here. It's probably because that thing noticed me and didn't want me to get out, so it trapped Chia here. The youngest is so cute, do you really think Grandpa can't do anything to you? Wait and see, I will let you know what I am capable of, Master Chi. Seeing this, Su Tong couldn't help but frown. He vaguely felt that something was going to happen to Mr. Hu Chi, so he hurriedly turned to the next page. However, when the next page opened, it was a blank page. Could it be? He couldn't help but feel a thump in his heart. Although he didn't know Mr. Hu Chi, he couldn't help but feel a cold sweat for him, or to be more precise, he felt a cold sweat for themselves. After all, what was written in the diary was too incredible. What exactly is the thing referred to in it? There is no mention in the diary, but there is an evil atmosphere in every line of the words. Thinking of this, he turned 2 more pages in disbelief. When he turned the thin diary to the last page, Su Tong suddenly froze. On the last page of this diary, 6 large characters were suddenly written crookedly in blood. Be careful of shadows, run. Sorry, the update is a bit late. I wrote this chapter twice and deleted it twice. I am really not satisfied with it, so I have not finished it until now. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 50. The 6 crooked words in blood were reflected in his eyes, instantly making people feel shuddering, and a chill shot straight down the spine. Even Su Tong himself was shocked by these 6 words. He sat up and read the diary carefully again, but there was only so much in the diary. It's not so much a diary as it is Hu Qi's personal notes. But he left the notes here, where did he go? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look around wrinkle suspiciously. The cave is not big. If the last handwriting was left by Master Hu Qi, then there are only 2 possibilities. The first one is planning to leave, but he doesn't know whether he can leave alive, so he left this notebook as a warning to future generations. Then he went to find his own way. But if this is really the case, why didn't he write it more clearly, leaving only 6 words to let people think about it? Then the second possibility is that he is dying, and after hastily writing these 6 words, he plans to give it a try. But if that's the case, who is this book for? Of course there is another possibility, that is, both. But regardless of whether the results of their speculations were correct or not, the problems they faced now seemed to have become more difficult. Why are you in a daze? At this time, Team Wang saw that he was silent and stepped forward to ask. Su Tong handed him the diary in his hand and asked him to read it carefully before speaking. Mysterious. Captain Wang frowned, took the diary and sat aside to read it carefully. At first his expression was the same as his own, he felt confused at first and then found it ridiculous. But when he saw the back, even Team Wang couldn't help but start to murmur in his heart, until he turned to the last page under Su Tong's guidance. Captain Wang's face turned cold. Although he didn't know what was going on, looking at the line of blood words, Captain Wang couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He even looked at the shadow under his feet suspiciously. After a while, He patted his head and frowned. This damn place is actually a tomb. Isn't it said to be a place of immortality? Seeing that Captain Wang still didn't understand, Su Tong shook his head helplessly, thinking that the police chiefs of this era were still far behind their real bosses in terms of investigative consciousness and reasoning thinking, yet they still hadn't understood it yet. But he didn't want to break the window paper, because there were more troublesome things in front of him. You haven't thought about what we should do next? Su Tong lay on the crystal bed with his head on his hands and asked Captain Wang. Team Wang was startled and finally realized the problem. It was him. He just thought about escaping, but now they were trapped in this cave. What should they do next? When he walked to the entrance of the cave and took a look, he suddenly grinned and took a cold breath. He saw the female corpses standing on the cliff outside, with no intention of leaving at all. It's over. It's scary that we are going to become turtles in a jar now. After returning to the cave, Team Wang began to walk back and forth anxiously, looking east and west. Unfortunately, the cave was only limited to a small area, and there was no other way out. There are cliffs outside, and there are still those female corpses guarding them. There is not even a drop of water in the cave. They are making the sky and the earth useless now. In contrast, Su Tong was much calmer. He was lying on the crystal bed, looking at the empty cave ceiling in front of him and not knowing what he was thinking. Team Wang walked back and forth beside him for more than a dozen times, and finally couldn't bear it anymore when he saw how arrogant he was. Don't lie here, get up and think of a solution. Su Tong rolled his eyes at him, picked up the diary again, and scanned it line by line. After a while, he slowly sat up. He sat beside the crystal bed, but instead of thinking of a solution as Captain Wang thought, he stared blankly at the air in front of him. Just when Captain Wang opened his mouth to say something, he finally moved. However, it was completely different from what Captain Wang thought. Su Tong seemed to be in a daze. He first walked to the stone steps of the bottles and jars and groped around casually. Then he walked outside the cave entrance, stood there for a while, and then came back. Looking at Su Tong as if he was suffering from hysteria, Team Wang looked like a muggle for a moment and thought to himself, isn't this because he is possessed by an evil spirit? Captain Wang speculated uneasily, but did not dare to step forward rashly. He could only watch him walking around in the cave, until he took the diary, first crawled on the crystal bed, and held it with his fingers. He was writing on it like he was holding a pen. But after writing for a while, he threw it on the crystal bed and began to lie on the bed and fall asleep again. Xiao Chen. Captain Wang stepped forward and was about to try to wake him up when he suddenly saw Su Tong, who was lying on the crystal bed, suddenly opened his eyes, turned over and jumped out of the bed. He ignored Team Wang and carefully examined the crystal bed. Although it is said to be a crystal bed, it is not carved from a single piece of crystal, but is spliced together with more than a dozen large and small crystals. The bed base is made of high-grade Nanmuo, and the overall look is solid. Firm. If this thing were placed in reality, it would definitely be regarded as a national treasure-level cultural relic. Although Diary Huki did not say where this thing came from, he regretted that he could not take it out. But what he is more concerned about is, why is this bed placed here? Looking around, Su Tong suddenly felt enlightened when he saw the inconspicuous wear marks on the ground. This position is not comfortable, and even because of the lower stone wall on the side, it gives people a very depressing feeling, as if they are sleeping in an iron can. The cave is very large, so this bed can be placed in a more comfortable position. Moreover, this place is so weird that a normal person would not be able to sleep at all. Even if Mr. Hu Qi is a very brave person, he has no reason to deliberately build a bed for himself while sleeping, right? After thinking about it, there is only one explanation: there is something wrong with this bed. Come help. He called Captain Wang and asked him to be responsible for the head of the bed, while he was responsible for the end of the bed. With a hard push, the bed was slowly pushed to the other side. As the crystal bed was moved away, Su Tong and Captain Wang couldn't help but their eyes lit up. I saw that there was a huge hole under the bed. Such a big hole. This Huqi is really a tomb robber. Team Wang carefully looked at the entrance of the cave in front of him and couldn't help but secretly gasp. He had caught a lot of thieves, but not the tomb robbers. He once heard an old man in the team say that tomb robbers had to move mountains and dig holes through mountains, and he still had to do it himself. Didn't take it seriously. Now that I really saw such a big hole, I couldn't help but secretly gasp, thinking that even the engineers in the army might not be able to dig it so neatly. As expected. Su Tongchang let out a breath. No wonder Huqi could sleep so well. The hole was blocked. Even if there was something down there, he could hear the slightest movement. Let's go down and take a look. As he spoke, he jumped into the thief's cave and walked inside without waiting for Team Wang's reaction. Why? Captain Wang had no choice but to admire this young comrade Xiao Chen. After all, if it were me, I wouldn't touch this bed no matter how hard I thought. What's more, if it weren't for him, I would be dead now. Thinking of this, Captain Wang's bad impression of Su Tong suddenly changed a lot. The two of them jumped into the robbery cave one after another. The robbery cave went downwards at an angle of 60 degrees, like a slide. I don't know how Huqi dug it, but he perfectly avoided those indestructible stones. When the two of them were sliding halfway, Su Tong suddenly stepped on his feet, causing his body to stop suddenly. This caught Team Wang, who was following behind him, a little off guard and almost hit him. He couldn't help complaining, "Why did you stop so suddenly? Shhh." Before he finished speaking, Su Tong made a silent gesture and raised his ears to indicate to Captain Wang to listen carefully. Da-da-da, the footsteps seemed far away, but if you listened carefully, there was actually the sound of someone talking. Are you sure you don't know where those two people are hiding? I don't know, we also found out in the blink of an eye that they were gone. Humph, I advise you not to play tricks, otherwise, Brother Huoying will definitely let you taste what life is worse than death. That was the sound of a mourning dog. Su Tong definitely heard it wrong, but he didn't know whether the sound came from above or from below. The voice on the other side seemed to be that of Yang Zixuan and the others. It seemed that they had fallen into the hands of Sangu's group again. The specific reason was unknown. After the sound gradually faded away, Su Tong took out a breath carefully. He was worried that the mourning dog's sense of smell was so sensitive that it would detect their location. Continue to go. After greeting Team Wang, the two continued to slide down. It took about 5 or 6 minutes to slide to the bottom of the thief cave, but it didn't seem to be the end here. There was only a sporadic ray of light in the darkness, which actually shone down from above their heads. Oops. Captain Wang just stood up when his feet suddenly slipped and he seemed to have stepped on something. He fumbled and picked it up and saw that it was a flashlight. After groping with his fingers for a few times, he could find the words "Jinwen Flashlight Factory." He tried pressing the switch, and the flashlight still had power. Hey, look. Looking at the dim yellow light, Captain Wang was immediately overjoyed. Finally, he no longer had to smear the darkness and moved forward. As soon as he raised the flashlight, a bloody corpse was reflected in front of the two of them. There will be another update in the evening.